Welcome to the Future of Education. I'm Michael Horn, excited to have this conversation with you all today. And if you're tuning in, just a reminder, make sure you subscribe, rate it if you like the conversation, because the folks that I'm going to talk to today are just doing some incredible work out of Cajon Valley Union School District in California. I'm going to bring them up to the main screen right now. We've got Ed Hidalgo and David Miyashiro. I probably just bungled that, David, after we just went over it. But it is good to see you both. I got to know Ed and David a few years ago, and then reacquainted again a couple years after that at what was then called an INACOL, now an Aurora Institute conference. And I was just blown away with the work that they were doing in school districts, in their school district, around exposing students to the broader world outside of schools and helping them discover their passions, who they are, how they want to contribute in the world, creating mentors around them, really just understanding the broader world and contextualizing all the academic work that they do. And that it doesn't even do it justice, frankly, to both of you, what you guys have created. But before we get into the what and sort of the basics of what you guys have created, Ed, I know this was somewhat a brainchild of yours, the world of work, from before you were involved with the district. So you want to just take people back 7 years or so and talk about the gem of this idea and where you were, that you saw students who were as young as elementary school needed to be connecting to the real world and understanding what work opportunities were out there.
Sure, Michael. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you and Dr. Miyashiro and be able to share a little bit about the story of the work that we're doing. It's truly an honor to serve students and families here in our community and work with an amazing leader like David. So yes, about 2014, I had a career dream that was able to come to reality thanks to an amazing vice president who saw the potential in this idea and this concept of bringing students on site to the corporation. At that time, I was working at Qualcomm. I worked in human resources and talent acquisition, and really was the brainchild of many of my colleagues and teammates who really saw the importance of helping young people aspire to careers they didn't know existed. Of course, we were recruiting talent from all over the globe and trying to inspire people to get into engineering and STEM fields. And yet in our own backyard and with many of our employees, their own kids didn't know what they did at Qualcomm. These are people who had many long careers as engineers, hardware, software, system test, but yet young people didn't know to aspire to these careers. So we were hiring people from other parts of the world in many cases. So the idea was to bring young people from the various school districts here in San Diego to give them access to an full day out of school experience where they could tinker and build with Arduinos and work on laptops and create robotic creations, which on its own would have been incredible. But they also had this opportunity to learn about the world of work and the hundreds of different careers that were accessible in this 30,000 employee company, from pilots to software engineers to accountants to marketing designers, to chefs and HVAC and carpenters. An entire city lived within this one organization. So more than 15,000 students would come to this lab, and they'd get to explore and learn about themselves and how they might find their place in a place like Qualcomm. So through that experience, I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Miyashiro, and now we're getting to do the work here. Yeah.
So David, as you jet off for a second, I'm curious, and you're obviously live there, right? So I'm curious, like, how did you recognize the work that he was doing at Qualcomm and start to bring it into the district? And why did you think that this was so important? Like, why did you see this gap that kids weren't aware of all the different career pathways that were out there?
Well, I think first I wasn't aware of all the career paths that were out there. But I was while he was talking, I saw a first iteration of the world of work from Qualcomm.
Holy smokes! Wow.
These career cards, and then what it's turned into now with the entire world of work. Yeah. But what happened is we got 30 scholarships to bring 30 middle school kids to Qualcomm for this experience, the world of work at the Think of It Lab, and it was for these kids. We picked our children that were at risk, that really were at the brink of just checking out of school. And all of them left changed. They had career aspirations, and they were validated for their unique individual strengths and interests. And the teachers said it lasted. When the kids went back to school, they continued on the path knowing that the school is here for my future, as opposed to this place I have to go because my parents tell me I have to go. But 30 students of 17,000 a year is not scalable. And we asked the question, how can we give this to all of our kids? Because Qualcomm could only have 30 a day, and there's 300,000 students in all of San Diego. And that happened at the same time I was asking questions from our local chamber, our economic development council, and our city manager about our school district. And he told me, K-12 is stigmatizing the most important work in our country. In San Diego, you have the Navy, the Marines, and the Air Force. There's nothing in school that tells them that that's a viable option, not just for service, but also to attain a GI Bill and college opportunities. There's infrastructure. In San Diego, we have what's called the East County, where we live, and it's known that East County builds San Diego. It's the home of advanced manufacturing and real estate development, commercial and private. And there's no pathway in school that shows that you can be a journeyman or start a business or learn a skill and then create something from nothing. And so all these people telling us that we are stigmatizing labor, we are preparing kids on an escalator to nowhere, and then seeing our kids that are at risk come to Qualcomm and light up and think about their future. That's when we said, how can we turn this one-day experience into a comprehensive K-12 curriculum solution so that every child can experience this? Mm-hmm. And that was the beginning of the journey. I think I sent you a picture of one of the first meetings where we met each other, like, we can create this.
Yes. That's fascinating, by the way. I want to take a moment and pause on something you said about K-12 stigmatizing so many of these work options. I think you're right about that. It's not just K-12. I think it's our colleges and universities, faculty members there often look down on a vocation in many ways. Can you just talk a little bit more about your realization around that, and how was it received in the school community when you made that observation?
In the school community, it was almost like a foreign language, but we also had the benefit of the San Diego Workforce Partnership, which I think is the #1 workforce board in the country. And
I think that's right.
CEO Peter Kallstrom, actually Ed hired him, he's on the board, had produced a report called Opportunity Youth. And it was a report that showed that kids aged 16 to 24 are not working and not in school. And we had a large majority of that population. So it's just showing us, data is showing us that we're failing these kids. And that matched with business leaders and civic leaders telling us that we're stigmatizing labor, and evidence that children that have exposure to things and belief that they can achieve it will actually do it.
Yes.
It just, all the right things happened at the right time in 2015, 2016 for that to work.
So let's talk about then what you guys built, the world of work, and how that came together, and the curriculum that you now offer all your students as part of their learning experience to learn what's out there and figure out what is it like to be an engineer in a particular, in Qualcomm. What is it like to be doing the HVAC systems somewhere? All of those pathways that you've created.
Well, it all started with a theory of change and theory of action. Had the opportunity to partner. Our story really is about partnerships, by the way, as David mentioned, the Workforce Partnership. They're a huge part of our story, and the University of San Diego is a big partner in this journey as well. We started with a theory of change that really began with the career development framework called the Mission of Me, and the importance of every child. Yeah, and you can see it behind me. The Mission of Me is all about this three pillars, these important pillars. And I'll swing around 3 pillars. Every child should gain a level of self-awareness about their unique strengths, interests, and values. This is all research-based. We integrate vocational psychology, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But we believe that every child, as a second pillar, should have access to both academic and career exposure and opportunities. We call it the journey. And the third pillar is really about my story, that every child should be able to tell their story. And it's so unique because as you sat across the table in an interview, the first question that human resources ask you is, tell me about yourself. And even how many of us as adults struggle with that question. So through our TED Ed curriculum and through the work that we do with the world of work, students are beginning to tell their story by developing a common language of interests. And so we ground in interests, and Dr. Miyashiro has just pulled some of our resources. Of course, teachers wanted physical materials and digital materials, so we created the physical resources to ensure that we could create a framework where teachers would have easy access to being able to deploy this work in their classrooms. We believe that teachers are the most important part of this process. They have 180 days to develop a relationship with the child, and that career development is a human process. And this work can be integrated in the classroom, no matter what the subject matter is. But we do create some elements that are easy enough for teachers to deploy as is, but also to be able to craft and create as creative as they might be. So the extension of that is truly this connection with the RIASEC framework. And I'll end on that. But the RIASEC is, what you see here, is the most researched of all vocational typologies. It's used by vocational counselors and coaches and career development experts around the globe. And we ensure that our children get exposure of the RIASEC, their interest themes, claim and self-report their interests across a variety of different careers and experiences within their classroom. So ideally, a teacher is going to invite a student to explore a career, simulate a career, have an as-if experience, to meet a professional, ideally someone that looks like them. And we've had hundreds of thousands of live industry chats, even through the pandemic. And then fourth, that they're going to have a demonstration of learning or practice. So they're going to be able to engage in experiences that allow them to show the new knowledge, skills, and experiences that they've developed. So in a nutshell, that's the human process, the physical human process. And we've now also transitioned that into a digital platform that connects the RIASEC and the world of work with literacy. And that might be a later topic, but that's the fastest that we can make to answer your question. Thank you, Dr. Miyashiro.
Yeah, no, that's great. And seeing the visuals that you're pulling in are super helpful, I think, to anchor these different components. How many career pathways would an elementary school student have, learned about in the course of their time in the school? And then let's do the same thing for middle school. And how does it translate as you guys are now building out a high school as well?
It's a minimum of 6 per year. So the RIASEC, these are the different categories of interests. And so Ed asked the question in year 1, how does a child aspire to a career that they don't know exists? And in the same way, how does a child know that they like a food if they've never tasted it? We created these career explorations, almost like project-based learning, but in the lens of a career, for kids to be able to practice it in the classroom and have a reflection. And so they have to try everything: realistic, hands-on doing, investigative, using math and science to solve problems, artistic, creative self-expression, social, to help the doers, the enterprising,
public speakers and persuaders,
and
the conventionals, those who like to organize facts, data, and figures.
And so kids, have to go through each one at least once per year. And then after their experience, they meet a pro in each category. Learning from Julia Fisher's work on networks and social capital, we're starting to utilize parents as our primary source of professionals. And it was right there in front of us all the time. We're now utilizing that network to build an ecosystem in the community, because our parents work at Qualcomm and Illumina, in construction, at the police department. They represent the entire world of work in our own district. And so with Julia's help, we've really leveraged that opportunity.
And that's, Michael, what I've learned is, to what Dr. Miyashiro is sharing here, of course, the parents are right here. They're right in our backyard. We have more than 30,000 of them. They are our first who you know. Why aren't we paying attention to that so important, that critical network? They're right here. They go to work every single day, but we don't ask them to come in. But that second piece is, we teach teachers how to do this work right in their classrooms. We give them the framework, the understanding, and that common language of RIASEC to be able to integrate this in whatever it is that they're doing. We've outsourced career development to software, and that is malpractice. And we've been doing it now for decades. When it's a human process, it's about relationships and conversations and reflections. Did you like it or did you not, and why? And it happens across the lifespan. And our teachers have become masterful at doing this work.
It's fascinating. I want to come back to the teachers in a moment, just to sort of make 3 points on what you all are talking about and reinforce it. I always tell the story that, growing up in Washington, D.C., I literally did not know what an engineer was because we have lots of different types of people inside the Beltway, but not a lot of engineers. And it was like junior or senior year of college that finally, when people said engineering, it like dawned on me what they were actually talking about, because of that absence of connection to other career pathways and that intentional exploration that you're setting up, but also the deliberate cultivation of the second thing. You're talking about Julia Freeland Fisher's work of social capital, bringing real people in. So you start to build a network, if this is something that does resonate with you, that you can start to navigate your way through it, even if it's someone that you know just a little bit, but you now know them in that professional context. So you can ask a question, right? And maybe get that first internship and double click on it, and see if this is really what you like to do. And then I also just want to also give a shout out to the San Diego Workforce Board that you were talking about, and Peter's work. I've interviewed him for Forbes. They do innovative stuff on all sides of this question around education to career, including pioneering some really interesting income share agreement arrangements and things of that nature that have just, I think, really create a much more seamless way for people to get into careers and learn along the way without going into a lot of debt and stuff like that. And so they obviously are innovating on all sides of this, which is just fascinating to hear that come out. I want to go back to the teachers though, because you talked about how the teachers have really embraced this and learned to like it. I suspect a lot of these career pathways though were very unfamiliar for them as they've dug in, and maybe a little intimidating. How has that worked, sort of that co-learning process?
Do the mask analogy.
Definitely. Well, when we start with coaching, we go into a district. We always say that we start with the adults first, and we use the airline analogy. If you're on the airplane and we lose cabin pressure, a small mask will fall from the ceiling. Please apply it to yourself first, and then before you apply it to others. So it's important to give the adults the gift of understanding their unique strengths, interests, and workplace values first. So then they can start to deconstruct the careers and see their likes and dislikes in who they are matching to the actual career. And it makes all the careers so much more relatable when you understand the human in the job. It's not just about the job or the task or the skills. Who's the human in the job? Do they wear flip-flops to work? Do they wear a tie to work? Do they do public speaking? Do they work independently? Do they work remote, at distance, with people, with not people? It's human. So the more that we can gift the adults with that human understanding, the more that these careers become accessible and familiar.
And in year one with teachers, so Ed went to every school in our district and gave them a one-day version of the world of work and strength, interests, and values, took them through the whole assessment. And we knew it was right when they asked, can I use this for my son? Will you do this for my child? Because so many of our teachers had children who had gone off to college, moved home, and didn't know what they wanted to do. And so Ed would help them and understand, well, here's where your strengths and interests lie. Here's where that might line up, and aim at the world of work. And really that process should have happened in the process of K-12. And that's why we built it this way.
This afternoon, I have a meeting with the child of one of our employees who has returned back after college and doesn't know what's next.
I mean, you guys have built sort of the ultimate career counselor application sort of in your district, right? In terms of helping people navigate all these pathways and understanding, bringing it to life, situating it inside your own journey and so forth. I'm curious, in your own career path, Ed, and maybe this is a question for you, David, how'd you get Ed to jump from Qualcomm to the district then?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, we invited Ed to give a TED Talk at our annual TEDx event where he talked about this work. He presented it to us in terms of how he was doing that at Qualcomm. And I hope in the process he fell in love with us and our community to say that we could do this for children and change every child's life, not just 30 at a time, but 30 times 30, times 30, times 30. And what a gift to public education that we got the leader in global career development here working in a public school district.
David leads with enterprising, so he did a good job on me to bring me in, that's for sure. But people say they often don't leave the jobs, they leave the manager of the job. And so in the same way, there's that leader, that manager that draws you in. And David definitely drew me in, understanding his strengths and the complementary nature of the way that we operate. David is futuristic ideation, so he sees things so far ahead of everyone else. He's so gifted with this view of the future and what's possible. And I love helping to make that vision a reality. And so together it's been a great combination, but I've learned so much from him.
I mean, it's just a tremendous partnership in that way, right? David is superintendent, you coming in, Ed as the chief innovation and engagement officer. You all started to speak to the change management process and how you got teachers more and more familiar with it. I'm curious, sort of other steps that were critical to take internally, so that it is giving advice to other districts who want to take similar steps.
I think the first advice is before you start to do this new innovative stuff, you have to decide what it is you're going to stop doing. And so in our district, when I first got here, this district had been just ravaged by No Child Left Behind and the practices of micromanaging and teacher-proofing curriculum and a laser-like focus on standardized testing, that most teachers were not feeling the love and joy that they came into teaching to experience. And so the world of work and career development and social emotional learning almost gave them permission to go back to their why of why they started the profession in the first place. I love children. I want to cultivate them and help them have a better future. No Child Left Behind took all that away. And so really it was just giving them back that gift of joy that they pursued in their beginning years. And I think by the Gallup results and the assessments we have for employee engagement, our people are happy at work because they're doing work that matters.
And there's, building on what Dr. Miyashiro just said, from your book, Michael, what's the statistic? 75% of the students.
Yeah, 75% who go to college do what's expected of them, drop out or transfer. Yeah.
And how about the piece about those that don't have their why?
Yeah, if you don't have your why, roughly 60%, I think, say that the experience is completely miserable and a waste of time.
So right there, and as I have high schoolers going through the high school process, there is no way that 9 through 12 is nearly enough time for a child to understand and select a major for the majority. I'm sure for 10 or 15%, it absolutely is. But for the vast majority of that 9 through 12 pathway, there is no way with AP, with honors, with sports, with volunteerism, with ASB and everything else that you can possibly get a full comprehensive world of work experience so that a child can really make a decision around a major in post-secondary, let alone whether it should be 2-year, 4-year apprenticeship or anything else. I mean, to say that middle school is where it needs to begin, okay, yes, it should begin in middle school, but it really should begin in primary. It should really begin in kinder and first and be a 2-gen strategy because of that data that you just shared. And that data is something that we shared with teachers because they didn't know the data. So as you're starting with understanding these things about shifting the culture, you have to also share the data. And that's why I thank you for your book, Choosing College. So important. I've shared it with many people. Because
thank you for that.
The data is so important.
What are you hiring college for?
Exactly, right, guys. Yeah. So let's double click then on the data that you're seeing now from it, right? You mentioned the No Child Left Behind response, and I say response because sometimes I think No Child Left Behind in and of itself didn't say do drill and kill to the exclusion of joy and things like that. It was a response to it, right? And so I'm curious, like, what are you seeing in the data now of people going on to careers, college? I suspect even test scores, I'm going to guess, actually have probably gone up because people are more passionate, but I don't want to assume that. I'm curious what you see.
Yeah, we initially hired the University of San Diego to do a third-party efficacy study, and they measured what they call possible future selves. I think that's a valid and reliable data set. And so we've seen tremendous upswing of our children having a hope for possible selves and also a feared for possible selves, which is in correlation, equates to the right path. Yeah. But recently, because of our partnership with Beable, Saki Dodelson, who created and founded Achieve 3000, has now created Beable, which we've infused the world of work into.
Mhm.
Now we're seeing interest, career development, social emotional learning, and literacy aimed at ACT and SAT preparedness, and the types of literature and literacy that kids need in the different aspects of work, whether it's technical, engineering, computer science, or humanities type of pathway. So now we have real data showing trajectories on all fronts, and it's really exciting.
That literacy piece is fascinating. I want to come back to that in a moment because that's obviously the next frontier. But first, I want to think a little bit about, you all have put this into the district. I'm curious, Ed, I guess 2 questions for both of you. But first, Ed, why was David and Cajon Valley Union the school district that did this as opposed to the others that, also had this opportunity sending kids to Qualcomm for a day? What was the secret sauce there in your mind? And then second, you all have digitized this curriculum. You all spend a fair amount of time, talking to audiences about this and helping other districts think about it. What are you seeing in terms of spread? Are other districts starting to adopt this?
Yes, definitely. So on the first question, just David, the human that he is what drew me to Cajon Valley, and the questions he was asking and the work that he had already started, especially around one-to-one. So that wasn't a hurdle that we needed to cross. Every child already had their Chromebooks. And so that meant that we could have a very solid trajectory towards achieving our additional goals as it relates to spread, right? And maximizing accessibility in every classroom for every child. Because in my mind, it's all about equity, a systemic process, and that the tools were in place for us to be able to accomplish that. And also the relational tools were in place, the relationships with business, our mayor. It was just, David had done such an incredible job building that foundation. So the earth was ready to accept this work. Secondly, really with our partnership with Beable, we have been able to make our work accessible. So we're in school districts in Alabama and Nevada, of course, across California, but also Missouri and Indiana and Illinois. So we're starting to see the spread of the work. It's different work. And in some cases, we know that some districts aren't right for the solution because they're just looking to check a box. Also, if their culture isn't ready and they're not serious about integrating this idea of career for every child in every grade in a 2-gen strategy, they may not be right for us as partners. But for those who we are partnering with, there's incredible excitement around doing this work with teachers, building through to counselors, and then making sure that ultimately it's a systemic 2-generational strategy that includes families, not just the child.
Fascinating also that you guys now, you built the digital curriculum yourself first. There wasn't an off-the-shelf provider for this. Probably part of that is also an outgrowth of No Child Left Behind, not having a market for this sort of career exploration. But interesting that you're now able to partner with a software vendor, Achieve 3000, that makes robust literacy tools for districts, and that they see something in this. What changed that allowed you to have a partnership like that out there?
Actually, COVID accelerated us quite a bit because prior to COVID, all of our resources were almost physical. The digital things that we produced were for the teachers and students to engage with around the physical activities. But when COVID happened, we had to digitize everything and push it to the home. And we had just started our partnership with Beable, and they saw the opportunity and said, we can program this into not only digitization, but machine learning and artificial intelligence, so that our literacy, interest, and career development, we can program and personalize what the kids are reading and interested into to keep them engaged and to measure all these things in a learner record. And it's taken some time, but we're now at the point where we're implementing it. It's just amazing what we can see about a child's interests and strengths and their literacy trajectory all in one place.
Through COVID, of course, we've been open for a long time, but there's been some classes that remain remote for whatever the case might be, and classroom space, whatever. But we've been able to get into lots of classrooms and see kids doing the work, and to see a child say, I like reading because the readings I'm getting are based on my RIASEC letters, and so I'm reading more. We've seen it over and over and over again. So these things are like so unlike fellows to be combined together. But when you combine them together, they make so much sense that you ask yourself, why did we never think about this before? The most researched of all vocational typologies, with the greatest meta research as it relates to interest and career, now connected to literacy and the reading experiences that children get, and then a path to their ideal career that's tracked on lexile growth over time. So
let's dig into that literacy piece a little bit more, because I think this is fascinating. And I think I hear part of this connection. Tell me if I'm jumping, a little bit ahead, but there's a lot of research on literacy that after you've learned how to read, reading is for learning, right? That's how you acquire new knowledge and so forth. And that tests of quote unquote reading comprehension are really knowledge tests at the end of the day. And the way that they've demonstrated this, there's the famous experiment about reading about baseball. And they took quote unquote high ability readers who knew nothing about baseball and quote unquote low ability readers who knew a lot about baseball. And they put a passage about baseball in front of them and said, what's the main idea and so forth. And the low ability ones did great and the high ability ones did terrible, because context and content, it turns out, matter a great deal. And you can imagine if you don't know anything about baseball and it says the player stole second base, you would think this was like a terrible thing that just happened in front of thousands of people in the crowd, right? So your sense of main idea and thinking critically about it and all these skills, right? It would be impossible to do without the content. And it sounds like you all, by integrating the literacy with the RIASEC profile, if I'm understanding correctly, you're building much more coherent domains of knowledge about someone's passion area and helping them really flesh out, right, bodies of understanding in essence by domain, which is, I'm going to guess, create a more coherent literacy curriculum for them on the other side. Am I reading that right, or am I missing things?
Yeah, no, you're spot on. And really the beauty is that the context is the human themselves, me as the individual. So it goes right back to the Castle SEL framework. When you look at right in that core circle, it's about understanding self. It's a part of our career development framework right behind us, right? And the mission of me. But the whole context of what I'm reading is based on what my interests are. And of course, just like on our career cards where we have the RIASEC aligned and the lexile, right? This was brilliant. This was Dr. Miyashiro, because we had the idea for the career cards. And there was, we were doing it, this is like 4 years ago at the very beginning. We were in a classroom and we had the students, it was elementary classroom, and they were selecting careers based on the deck. And they said, to the principal, I watched it happen, to the principal, this is the career that I want, principal. And the student almost stops, looks at the lexile and says, but I have to get my lexile up because this is a 1350 and I'm only at 700. And in that moment, I said, was the child making the connection between the lexile and their lexile? They know their lexile? That was new to me at the time. So now fast forward 4.5 years, and we have a technology that's using artificial intelligence, right? Using artificial intelligence and modern technology to integrate this vertical integration across grade levels of interest, the child's interests. And then the technology understands the child's interests, the careers that they're most connected to, and then gives them readings that are lexile appropriate, but also based on their interests.
Yeah, and it's incredibly interesting how you all are knitting this together. The one push I can imagine people saying who might be tuning in, and as we start to wrap up our time together, they might say, "Well, how do you not typecast someone, right? Like they go too deep into, I don't know, whatever field, right? And they're just reading about that, so they're missing." Broader civics readings or whatever it might be that is important for sort of a broader cultural literacy, or the fact that, we all change over time. What we're interested in at one point might be different from 10 years later. How do you navigate that?
Beable solves for that, because civics and humanities and history, they're all built in. So the core academics are programmed by the teacher so that every child does have to have some common experiences. It's the additional readings and the lexile growth, the on your own activities. So like in a blended learning, it's when the kids are working independently. That's when they get to be in their interest zone. But when they're a whole group, there are mechanisms within the Beable framework to make sure that a teacher can have a history lesson or a very topic specific thing. It's both and, it's not either or.
That's the other piece it sounds like you guys have done, is that there's a lot of, I mean, this isn't just about a curriculum. This is about an overhaul of the model itself, so that you're creating these individual and group experiences in intentional ways, bringing the parents in, that social capital in the community. And I imagine as you scale, you could start to bring in social capital from around the world, I would suspect.
Let me just for a second. So in 2013, I met Michael Horn, and he had just produced the first MOOC on blended learning. And we saw the first video, and he answered my email. I said, can we use this? Because we're going to take all of our teachers through this one-to-one journey. And he said, yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
To everything. And so thank you so much. Without you, I don't think we would be where we are.
You all are way too kind, but I'm appreciative. I just think that the steps forward you all are taking instructionally, connecting it to broader purpose and contribution, and then integrating that back into the instruction, so you're creating a virtuous circle in effect. That is going to do so many powerful things for learning worldwide. And so I selfishly want to figure out how to keep highlighting you guys, because there's a lot of work. As we wrap up, coming out of COVID, what are the new big things that we haven't talked about maybe that you're most excited about and we should keep an eye on?
I think I'll end with our vision is happy kids engaged in healthy relationships on a path to gainful employment. And we're excited that finally we have all the tools and resources and assessments that can deliver on those investments. Yeah.
Hey, that's a good vision. And keep us posted as you keep doing more. I appreciate the shout outs as well, but I'm pretty sure that the credit goes to those working on the ground. So you guys and your teams and that broader community. But everyone tuning in on the Future of Education, we'll be back next time, and give a thumbs up to these two gentlemen because they keep doing great work in Cajon Valley Union School District. Thanks so much.